The stars flickered oddly in the void above Valkyr Prime. Sethal pressed his four-fingered hands against the observatory's view screen, his silver eyes widening as the instruments recorded something impossible. Space itself seemed to ripple, like waves on a pond when a stone breaks the surface. "Elder scientist," his assistant called out, voice trembling. "The readings. They make no sense." Sethal moved quickly to the main console, his tall, slender frame casting long shadows in the dim light of the holographic displays. The numbers shouldn't exist. They suggested that reality itself was being torn apart 20 light minutes from their homeworld's outer defense perimeter. "Alert the High Council," he ordered, his usually steady voice catching in his throat. "And get me a direct link to the defense fleet." Before anyone could act on his commands, the impossible happened. Space split open like a wound, darkness pouring from darkness, and through that terrible gap came something that shouldn't exist. A ship, if it could be called that, emerged from the tear in reality. Its hull was black and angular, bearing markings in an unknown script, and it leaked remnants of impossible space from its wake. The Valkyrie Observatory erupted in chaos. Alarms blared as sensors overloaded, trying to process the vehicle's emergence. But what terrified Sethal most was how cleanly the ship had created the rupture, not like a natural phenomenon, but like a surgical cut made with terrible precision. "By the first light," Sethal whispered, using a phrase he hadn't uttered since his childhood in the temples. "They did this on purpose." The defense fleet responded quickly, surrounding the anomalous vessel with a dozen of their finest ships. The Valkyrie vessels, elegant and curved like the ocean waves their ancestors once sailed upon, looked almost fragile next to the angular monstrosity that had torn its way into their space. Inside the USV Nightingale, Robert Nash watched the alien ships through his bridge viewport with surprising calm. "Well," he said to his crew, "looks like we found someone." Status report. Hull integrity at 98%, his engineer reported. Void space transition was cleaner than most. "These new drive alignments are working better than expected." "Sir," called out his communications officer, "we're receiving transmissions from the alien vessels. Multiple frequencies, likely trying to establish contact." Nash straightened his uniform and smiled. First contact scenarios were always tricky, but he trained for this. "Put it on all frequencies, standard greeting package. Let's not keep our new friends waiting." The Valkyrie ships received the human transmission, a series of mathematical sequences followed by simple pictographic representations. But what caught their attention wasn't the message itself, but rather the casual way these beings had emerged from what Valkyrie religious texts called the between space, the nightmare realm that existed in the gaps of reality. On Valkyr Prime, the High Council convened an emergency session. The recordings from the observatory played on repeat, the moment of the ship's emergence causing several council members to avert their eyes. Their oldest legends spoke of tears in the universal fabric as wombs in creation itself, signs of the end times. Yet these beings wielded such power as casually as the Valkyrie used solar sails. "The ship remains in position," reported Fleet Commander Ventar. "They've made no aggressive moves, but, honored council members, they're preparing to do it again." True to the commander's words, the Nightingale's void space drive was powering up for a small tactical jump, a simple maneuver to demonstrate their capability to the alien vessels. To Robert Nash, it was as routine as taking a step. To the Valkyrie, it was like watching someone casually tear open reality for convenience. The second rupture was smaller, moving the Nightingale mere kilometers to demonstrate precision. The Valkyrie ships scattered in panic, their crews watching in horror as space itself was wounded once more. Their sensors recorded everything: the quantum fluctuations, the temporary breakdown of physical laws, the brief glimpse into something that should not be. Sethal, now aboard the Valkyrie flagship as scientific advisor, found himself both terrified and fascinated. These beings, these humans, had mastered what his people had only theorized. The equations flowing across his screen
showed that the Nightingale's drive wasn't just piercing reality. It was controlling the tiers with mathematical precision. "They're requesting visual communication," announced the Valkyrie communications officer, her voice steady despite the situation. On the main screen, Robert Nash's image appeared. The Valkyrie's first shock was how similar the being looked to them. Bipedal, symmetrical features, though with fewer fingers and oddly rounded ears. But it was the casual smile on Nash's face that truly unnerved them. Here was a being who had just torn holes in the universe, looking as relaxed as if he'd just taken a morning stroll. "On behalf of the United Space Vessel Nightingale and the human race, I extend greetings," Nash said, the Valkyrie translators quickly adapting to his speech patterns. "We apologize if our arrival caused any alarm. We're peaceful explorers, seeking contact with other civilizations." Settle stepped forward, designated as the primary contact by the High Council. "We welcome you," he managed, his scientific training battling with his instinctive terror. "Though your method of arrival is concerning." Nash's expression shifted to curiosity. "The void space drive. Is there something wrong with our transition point? We try to emerge well outside your primary traffic lanes to avoid any navigational issues." The casual way he discussed it, as if punching holes in the universe was a mere traffic concern, sent shivers through the Valkyrie command staff. But before they could respond, their sensors detected something else. 3 more ruptures forming at the edge of their detection range. "Ah," Nash said brightly. "That would be our security escort arriving. Standard protocol for first contact scenarios. I hope you don't mind, but once we detected your civilization, we called in some diplomatic support." The Valkyrie watched in mute horror as 3 more human ships emerged from their reality tiers, each wound in space-time, another violation of what they had thought were the universe's unchangeable laws. But worse than the wounds themselves was the dawning realization that this was, for humans, normal, routine, safe. As Sethel stared at the growing fleet of human vessels, each sitting in space like dark monuments to impossible science, he realized that everything his people knew about the universe would need to be reconsidered. Because humanity hadn't just mastered space travel, they had mastered something his people had considered forbidden, impossible, and horrifying. And they had done it with a smile. The first day of contact between humanity and the Valkyrie ended with a simple truth. The humans weren't just visitors from another world. They were beings who had turned cosmic horror into an exact science, and they couldn't understand why anyone would be afraid of that. In his private quarters that night, Sethel reviewed the sensor logs again and again, trying to understand. The humans had sent over their basic technical specifications as a gesture of good faith, and what he read both fascinated and terrified him. They called it void space technology, and they had been using it for over a century. Generations of humans had grown up knowing their ships traveled by tearing holes in reality itself. As he finally prepared for sleep, Sethel couldn't shake one troubling thought. If this was how humans traveled through space, what other impossible things did they consider normal? Tomorrow, the formal diplomatic talks would begin. But tonight, across Vakir Prime, few could sleep, knowing that above their world floated ships that defied the laws of physics, crewed by beings who thought that was perfectly natural. The cosmic horror, it seemed, had come not from the darkness between stars, but from the casual way humanity had mastered that darkness. Commander Lisa Wright stood before the Valkyrie High Council, her crisp blue uniform a stark contrast to their flowing silver robes. The Grand Chamber, with its spiraling architecture and shimmering walls, would have impressed most humans. But Wright's attention was on the way the council members flinched each time her presentation showed another void space transition. "The process is quite simple," she explained, gesturing to the holographic display. "We create a controlled quantum tunnel through what we call void space, allowing our ships to move faster than light without breaking relativistic laws." One of the council members, his silver skin pale even by Valkyrie standards, raised a trembling hand. You do this thousands of times each day." "Oh, far more than that,"
Wright said with a smile. Just in human space, we average about 50,000 transitions per standard Earth day. It's our primary method of interstellar travel. The chamber erupted in horrified whispers. Sethal, now serving as chief scientific advisor to the council, stepped forward. Commander Wright, perhaps you don't understand. These transitions, as you call them, they tear the fabric of reality itself. Well, yes, Wright agreed. But we've perfected the technique. The quantum stabilizers ensure that the tears heal properly, usually within minutes. Usually. Another council member's voice cracked on the word. Wright pulled up more detailed diagrams. There's a small percentage, about 0.01%, where the healing takes longer. But our latest drive designs include reality scar treatment protocols. It's really quite safe. The Valkyrie translator stumbled over the casual way she said reality scar treatment, as if discussing something as mundane as treating the scraped knee. Several council members had to leave the chamber. In orbit above, aboard the human diplomatic vessel USV Peacemaker, Chief Engineer Alan Parker was giving a similar presentation to Valkyrie scientists. He had opened up one of the void space drive panels, proudly showing off the technology that had revolutionized human space travel. The quantum manipulators are the real breakthrough, he explained, pointing to crystalline structures that seemed to absorb light. They let us punch through space-time with minimal energy expenditure. The whole system runs on about the same power as a small fusion plant. Kellamore, one of the Valkyrie's leading physicists, stared at the drive with a mixture of fascination and dread. But the dimensional barriers, the cosmic principles, oh, those were tricky to work around at first, Parker admitted cheerfully. But once we figured out you could stabilize the quantum foam with targeted tachyon bursts, it was just an engineering problem. Here, let me show you a test firing. Before anyone could object, Parker activated the drive's test sequence. The Valkyrie scientists watched in horror as space twisted in front of them, a small tear forming and then sealing itself. Several of them pressed their hands against their head crests, a gesture of warding against evil that their species hadn't commonly used in centuries. Back on the surface, Lisa Wright's presentation continued. We're particularly excited about sharing our void space navigation protocols. Our maps include safe transition zones, areas where reality is slightly more flexible. You map the weak points in the universe? Sethal asked, his scientific curiosity briefly overcoming his horror. Of course, it makes travel much more efficient, though we can punch through pretty much anywhere if we need to. The military drives are especially good at that. The mention of military applications sent a new wave of terror through the council chamber. The Valkyrie had assumed, hoped, that this was merely a dangerous form of travel. The idea that humans had weaponized it. Perhaps, the High Speaker said carefully, you could explain more about these military applications. Wright brightened. Oh, certainly. The tactical drives are fascinating. They can create multiple transition points simultaneously, or generate void space fields that can be used defensively. Some of our newer destroyers can even. She paused, finally noticing how many of the council members were swaying in their seats. Are you all right? Should we take a break? Commander Wright, Sethal said softly, in our history, in our most ancient texts, there are warnings about beings who could tear the walls of reality. They were called the destroyers of order, the breakers of laws. They were our apocalyptic nightmares. Wright blinked. Oh dear. And we've been doing it industrially for over a century. She paused, thinking. Well, if it helps, we have really good safety protocols. Somehow, this didn't seem to comfort the Valkyrie. Later that day, in a private meeting room, the Valkyrie High Council discussed their options. The sensor data was undeniable. Humans had mastered what their religions had warned against, what their physics had said was impossible. They're building new ships constantly, one council member reported. Each one equipped with these reality-breaking drives. Their children learn about it in schools, another added, having reviewed the educational materials the humans had shared. They have void space science projects. Sethel studied the technical documentation Wright had provided. Their understanding of quantum mechanics, of dimensional physics, it's beyond anything we imagined possible. And they treated it like it was simple engineering. What do we do? The high speaker asked the question they were all thinking. How do we handle diplomatic relations with beings who casually violate the laws of physics? Before anyone could answer, alarms blared across the city. In orbit, 3 massive human ships had just arrived. Colony vessels, they were told. Each transition point was large enough to swallow their largest ships whole. Through the observatory windows, they watched the new ships settle into orbit. Human ships now surrounded their homeworld, each one powered by technology that their nightmares hadn't properly prepared them for. That evening, Lisa Wright sat in her temporary quarters, composing her report to Earth Command. Cultural misunderstanding more significant than anticipated, she wrote. Valkyrie view void space technology as fundamentally unnatural. Recommend slower technological exchange program. Perhaps focus on other areas of cooperation first. She looked out her window at the Valkyrie capital city, its graceful spires reaching toward the stars. Somewhere out there, she knew, the Valkyrie were trying to come to terms with humanity's casual mastery of what they considered cosmic horror. In his laboratory, Sethel ran another analysis of the void space drive specifications. The math was elegant, beautiful even. The engineering was precise and careful. The humans hadn't just stumbled upon this technology. They had mastered it, refined it, turned it into an art form. A junior scientist entered with new sensor readings. Elder, she said hesitantly, we've detected something concerning. The transition points from the human ships. They're leaving traces. Sethel examined the data. The tears in space-time were healing, yes, but not completely. Like scars in living tissue, they left marks in the fabric of reality itself. And with thousands of human ships making thousands of transitions every day, he thought about what Commander Wright had said about mapping the weak points in space. Were they making those weak points? Were humans slowly changing the fundamental nature of space-time itself through their casual use of this technology? As night fell on Valkyr Prime, its people looked up at the stars with new eyes. Their ancestors had warned them about tears in reality, about beings who could break the laws of physics. But they had never imagined those beings would arrive in diplomatic vessels, offering technical documentation and safety protocols. The humans, meanwhile, prepared for another day of diplomatic talks, blissfully unaware that they had confirmed the Valkyrie's darkest fears. To them, void space travel was normal, safe, routine. They couldn't understand why the Valkyrie saw them as living embodiments of cosmic horror, and that, perhaps, was the most terrifying thing of all. The massive colony ship USV Pioneer hung in orbit above Valkyr Prime like a metal mountain. Captain Christopher Moore watched through the bridge windows as his crew prepared for another routine void space jump. They needed to adjust their position slightly to avoid a solar wind burst. Drive charging at 15%, his engineer reported. Standard micro-jump protocols engage. On the surface below, every Valkyrie sensor was pointed at the human vessel. Kelmore, working in the central observatory, noticed something that made his heart stop. Elder Sethel, he called out, voice shaking. The scars, they're getting worse. Sethel rushed to the monitoring station. The data was clear. Each new human void space transition was taking longer to heal. The tears in reality weren't closing properly anymore. Like fabric that had been ripped too many times, space itself was beginning to wear thin. How many transitions have they made in our system? He asked. 417 in the past week alone, Kellamore replied. And that's just in our monitored space. Above them, the Pioneer's drive activated. The Valkyrie scientists watched in horror as another wound opened in space. But this time, something was different. Through their instruments, they could see something moving in the void space tier, something that shouldn't exist. Captain Moore, a sensor operator aboard the Pioneer, called out,
We're getting some unusual readings from the transition point. Moore walked over to the console, sipping his coffee. Unusual how? Sir, there's something in there. The void space sensors are picking up patterns we've never seen before. Before Moore could respond, a message came from Valkyr Prime. The voice of Sethal, urgent and afraid. Please, you must stop. The barriers between realities. They're breaking down. Moore set down his coffee. Break down the sensor data, he ordered his crew, and get me Frank Patterson's research team up here. If there's something new in void space, we should study it. The research vessel USV Discovery arrived within hours, tearing another hole in the already weakened space above Valkyr Prime. Frank Patterson, head of the Void Space Research Division, was exactly what the Valkyrie had come to expect from humans. Brilliant, curious, and completely unconcerned with the cosmic horrors his work involved. Fascinating, Patterson said, studying the readings. The quantum fabric is showing signs of permanent deformation. We've never seen this level of reality scaring before. Sethal, now aboard the Discovery as a scientific liaison, tried to make the humans understand. Our ancient texts speak of this, he explained. When the walls between spaces grow too thin, things come through. Patterson's eyes lit up. Really? What kind of things? Do you have any historical data we could compare with our readings? You don't understand, Sethal said desperately. These aren't phenomena to be studied. They're warnings from our past. The void between realities was never meant to be breached. Well, that's a matter of perspective, Patterson replied cheerfully. We've been breaching it safely for decades. Here, let me show you our latest void space mapping data. The holographic display showed thousands of transition points throughout Valkyrie space, each one marked and categorized. To Patterson, it was a triumph of human engineering. To Sethal, it looked like a map of wounds in the universe itself. But worse was coming. As Patterson's team studied the weakening reality barriers, something began to respond to their presence. The first sign was subtle. Strange readings from the void space sensors. Odd patterns in the quantum noise. Sir, one of Patterson's researchers called out. The patterns, they're becoming more organized. Almost like something's watching us. Another researcher finished. In the Valkyrie capital, the High Council received Sethal's urgent report. The humans' constant use of void space drives had done more than leave scars in reality. It had attracted attention. Something in the space between spaces had noticed the tears. The humans don't understand, Sethal told the council. Their technology, their casual breaking of universal laws, it's like a beacon. And now things are responding. Above the planet, the Pioneer prepared for another jump. But this time, as the void space drive engaged, the tear in reality didn't behave normally. The edges of the quantum breach seemed to pulse with an unnatural light. Captain Moore, his sensor officer, called out, "Something's coming through." Moore watched calmly as shapes began to emerge from the void space tier. They defied description. Geometries that shouldn't exist, patterns that hurt the eyes to look at. His crew, trained for every possible space emergency, had no protocols for this. Well, Moore said, straightening his uniform, that's new. Patterson's research team was ecstatic. They launched probes into the tear, gathered readings, and began theorizing about the nature of these void space entities. The Valkyrie watched in horror as the humans treated cosmic horror like a scientific curiosity. Look at these quantum signatures, Patterson exclaimed. These beings exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. This could revolutionize our understanding of void space physics. Sethal couldn't understand how they could be so calm. The barriers between realities were breaking down. Ancient horrors were emerging from the void, and the humans were taking notes. In orbit, more ships arrived. The void space tiers were now taking minutes to heal, leaving visible scars in the fabric of space-time. The Valkyrie's worst fears had come true. Human technology had weakened reality itself. But the humans weren't afraid. If anything, They were excited. "We've never had a chance to study the long-term effects of concentrated void space usage before," Patterson told his team. "This is an unprecedented opportunity." The Valkyrie High Council met in emergency session. Their sensors showed more tiers forming, more entities showing interest in their space. The humans had done what their ancestors had warned against. They had broken down the walls between spaces, and they had done it without even realizing what it meant. That night, as the Pioneer's crew catalogued the strange phenomena emerging from their drive tiers, Sethal stood in the observatory. He watched another human ship arrive, another wound open in space. The entities were getting bolder, closer. The humans, with their sensors and probes and endless curiosity, didn't see them as harbingers of doom. They saw them as subjects for study. "Your people," he said to Patterson, who was excitedly reviewing the latest data, "you've mastered forces you don't truly understand." Patterson looked up from his screens. "That's what science is for," he said with a smile. "Understanding things. These void space entities could teach us so much about the nature of reality itself." As if in response to his words, another tear opened spontaneously in space above them. This time, nothing came through, but something looked out. The Valkyrie shuddered. The humans took more readings. And in the growing darkness between realities, things that should not exist continued to gather, drawn by humanity's casual violations of universal law. The cosmic horror had begun, but to the humans, it was just another scientific frontier to explore. Amanda Hughes guided her scout ship, the USV Pathfinder, through the edge of Valkyrie space. Her mission was simple: map the growing void space anomalies that had everyone so excited. The Valkyrie had begged them not to send more ships, but scientists back on Earth wanted data. Another reading at coordinates Mark 7, her science officer reported. "The tear's not healing at all this time." Amanda leaned forward in her captain's chair. Through the main viewport, she could see it, a rip in space that stayed open like a dark wound. The edges rippled with colors that shouldn't exist. "Launch Probe 3, she ordered. "Let's see what's on the other side." The Valkyrie observation post nearby sent an urgent message. "Please, stop. You don't know what you're calling to our reality." But it was too late. The probe entered the tier, and something answered. The entity that emerged defied description. It moved in ways that broke the laws of physics, its form shifting between states of matter that shouldn't exist. The Valkyrie observation team fell to their knees in terror. Amanda Hughes took a sip of her tea and opened a channel to Earth Command. "Scout Ship Pathfinder to Command. We've made first contact with a void space entity. Beginning scientific observations. Requesting research team backup." Her calm voice shocked the Valkyrie observers more than the cosmic horror floating outside their station. The humans weren't running. They weren't praying. They were taking notes. Back at Valkyr Prime, Chief Researcher Susan Reynolds was already preparing her team. The USV Discovery, now modified to study the entities, broke reality once more as it jumped to the Pathfinder's location. "Look at that structure," Reynolds exclaimed as her sensors focused on the being. "It's existing in at least 7 dimensions at once. The energy readings are off the charts." The entity turned its attention to the human ships. In all the Valkyrie's nightmares about such beings, this was the moment where reality would end. Instead, Reynolds activated the ship's communication array. "This is Chief Researcher Susan Reynolds of the United Space Vessel Discovery. We extend greetings and welcome peaceful contact." The Valkyrie observation team couldn't believe what they were seeing. The humans were trying to talk to it. The entity responded, not with words, but with patterns of quantum energy that the humans' computers eagerly recorded. Reynolds' team began analyzing the data immediately. "It's using void space itself as a communication medium," she reported excitedly. "The patterns suggest a form of mathematics we've never seen before. This is amazing." More entities began emerging from the tier. Each one was a violation of natural law, a thing that should not be. The Valkyrie observers huddled in their station,
certain they were about to witness the end of everything. Instead, they watched in disbelief as Susan Reynolds established a basic form of communication with the entities. Her team mapped their quantum signatures, created preliminary classification systems, and began drafting first contact protocols. The entities seemed drawn to our void space drive signatures, Reynolds noted in her log. They may have been aware of our transitions for years, but only now have we created tiers stable enough for them to make contact. Amanda Hughes moved the Pathfinder closer to one of the entities. Her sensors recorded everything as the being shifted through impossible geometries. "They're not hostile," she reported. "If anything, they seem curious. About us, about our technology." She paused. "About how we breached the walls between spaces so easily." The Valkyrie finally found their voice. "Curious," their lead observer asked. "These are the destroyers of order, the breakers of reality itself." "Well, technically, we broke reality first," Reynolds pointed out. "They're just responding to what we did. And look at these quantum equations they're sharing. Their understanding of dimensional physics is incredible." More research ships arrived, tearing new holes in space. Each rupture now stayed open longer, allowing the entities easier access to normal space. The Valkyrie watched in horror as humans treated cosmic horror like a scientific conference. "We're establishing regular communication windows," Reynolds reported to Earth Command. The entities, we're calling them void dwellers for now, seem eager to share information. Their perspective on quantum mechanics is revolutionary. Amanda Hughes led her scout ship through another tier, mapping the strange space beyond. The void dwellers followed, sharing data about their realm. Where the Valkyrie saw nightmare fuel, humans saw an opportunity to learn. In her quarters that night, Reynolds reviewed the day's findings. The void dwellers had shared insights about reality that would advance human science by decades. All because humans had accidentally caught their attention by treating space-time like tissue paper. "The Valkyrie don't understand," she told her team during their daily briefing. "These beings aren't here to destroy reality. They're here because we're the first species they've met who can reach into their space without going mad." The void dwellers continued emerging, each one bringing new knowledge. They taught the humans about spaces between spaces, about laws of physics that existed beyond normal reality. The Valkyrie's worst nightmares had become humanity's best teachers. "Think about it," Reynolds said to a terrified Valkyrie scientist. "Your people saw the void as something to fear. We saw it as something to study. Maybe that's why they're willing to talk to us." The Valkyrie observation posts recorded everything. They watched humans chat with cosmic horrors, saw them take samples of reality-breaking materials, observed them learning things that no mortal mind should know. And the humans stayed sane. They didn't just endure contact with these impossible beings. They enjoyed it. "The void dwellers have a fascinating perspective on space-time," Reynolds noted in her research log. "To them, our void space drives are like knocking on their door. They've been waiting for someone to knock back." As more entities gathered around the human ships, the Valkyrie finally understood something that terrified them more than the cosmic horrors themselves. Humans weren't afraid because they were already something just as strange. A species that casually tore holes in reality, that treated cosmic horror like a research opportunity, that faced the impossible with curiosity instead of fear. Perhaps humans had been the real cosmic horror all along. Amanda Hughes prepared her ship for another venture into void space, excited about what new discoveries awaited. The entities swirled around her ship like curious children, sharing their impossible knowledge. And in their observation post, the Valkyrie wondered what kind of universe they lived in, where the destroyers of order had arrived not to end reality, but to attend a scientific conference with beings who treated cosmic horror as an engineering problem. The awakening hadn't brought destruction. It had brought something far stranger, understanding between creatures that broke the laws of physics and humans who had never cared much for those laws anyway. The void dwellers changed their behavior suddenly and without warning. What started as scientific exchange turned into something else when a new group of entities emerged from the tiers in space. These weren't interested in sharing knowledge. They were interested in conquest. Captain Peter Martinez watched from the bridge of the USV Stormbreaker as 3 Valkyrie colonies went dark in quick succession. The hostile void dwellers moved through space in ways that violated physics, appearing and disappearing at will. "Status report," he demanded, standing calmly as reality twisted around his ship. "Sir, the hostile entities are using the existing void space tiers to attack Valkyrie worlds," his tactical officer reported. "They're eating the reality around the colonies." Martinez nodded, as if this was just another tactical challenge. "Contact Admiral Nancy Coleman. Tell her we need the full fleet. And get me Frank Patterson's research team." The Valkyrie defense fleet tried to fight back, but their weapons passed harmlessly through the void dwellers. Their ships, beautiful and advanced as they were, couldn't touch beings that existed in multiple dimensions at once. "Fall back," the Valkyrie commander ordered. "We cannot fight what we cannot hit." But the humans didn't fall back. Instead, the Stormbreaker moved forward, its void space drive humming with power. "The Valkyrie can't fight them," Martinez told his crew, "because they never thought about weaponizing reality itself. Lucky for them, we did." Frank Patterson's voice came over the comm. "Captain, if you modulate your void space drive to match their quantum frequency, you should be able to disrupt their dimensional stability. In simple terms, Doctor, tear reality apart right where they're standing." Martinez smiled. "Now that's something we know how to do." The Stormbreaker's drive activated, but not for travel. Instead, it created a controlled tear in space directly through one of the hostile entities. The being screamed in frequencies that shouldn't exist as it was forced back into its own dimension. "It worked," Patterson exclaimed. "The drive can act as a weapon against them." Admiral Nancy Coleman arrived with the human fleet, each ship now modified to use their void space drives offensively. The Valkyrie watched in shock as humans turned their greatest fear into a weapon. "All ships, prepare for reality combat," Coleman ordered, her voice steady. "Pattern Omega-7. Let's show these entities why you don't mess with human space." The battle that followed defied description. Human ships created carefully calculated tiers in spacetime, trapping void dwellers between dimensions. The hostile entities fought back with impossible geometries and physics-breaking attacks, but humans had mastered breaking physics long ago. "They're trying to collapse normal space around the third colony," a sensor operator reported. "Match their frequency," Martinez ordered. "Tear a bigger hole. If they want to play with broken reality, let's show them how it's done." The Stormbreaker's drive pulsed, ripping space wide open right where the void dwellers were gathering. The entities scattered, apparently shocked that their prey could manipulate reality so precisely. Admiral Coleman coordinated the fleet's movements with cold efficiency. Each ship's drive was calibrated to create a specific type of tier, forming a pattern that trapped the hostile entities in a web of broken spacetime. "We're not just defending," she told her captains. "We're teaching them why humanity's mastery of void space isn't just for travel." The Valkyrie fleet watched from a safe distance as humans fought cosmic horror with cosmic horror. Ships dove through temporary tiers in reality, emerging behind void dwellers. Drive systems were used to create quantum barriers, trapping entities between dimensions. "This is impossible," a Valkyrie commander whispered. "They're fighting the unfightable." Peter Martinez stood on his bridge, calling out orders as his crew turned their ship's reality-breaking drive into a precision weapon. The hostile void dwellers had expected easy prey. Instead, they found a species that had industrialized cosmic horror. "They're retreating," Patterson reported, his sensors tracking the entities. "The quantum signature suggests they're trying to return to their own space." "Not yet," Coleman ordered. "First, we show them why they shouldn't come back. All ships, execute Pattern Alpha 9. The human fleet moved in perfect synchronization, their drives activating simultaneously. They didn't tear holes in reality this time. They shredded it, creating a cascade of dimensional disruptions that forced the hostile entities back into their own realm. "Now seal the tiers," Coleman commanded. "All ships, coordinated void space pulse on my mark." The fleet's drives pulsed one final time, but instead of creating new tiers, they'd forced the existing ones close. The hostile void dwellers were trapped on their own side, facing something they had never expected: beings who could match their reality-breaking powers. In the aftermath, the Valkyrie approached the human ships cautiously. They had just witnessed something that changed their understanding of cosmic horror forever. Humans hadn't just fought the unfightable. They had won. "How?" a Valkyrie commander asked Martinez. "How did you know how to fight them?" Martinez shrugged. "We've been breaking reality for generations. We figured if we can tear holes in space-time for travel, we can do it for defense too. It's just applied physics." Admiral Coleman began organizing recovery efforts for the affected colonies. The hostile void dwellers had left scars in reality throughout the region, but humans knew how to handle those too. "We'll need to stabilize the quantum fabric," Patterson told the fleet. "Standard void space repair protocols should work, just on a larger scale." The Valkyrie watched as humans casually discussed repairing the fabric of reality itself. Their ancient nightmares had been defeated by beings who treated cosmic horror as a technical challenge. "Your people," a Valkyrie scientist said to Martinez, "you didn't just survive contact with them. You beat them at their own game." Martinez looked out at the stars, where reality was still healing from the battle. "Maybe that's why they attacked. They found out we could do what they do, but with precision they never imagined." The human fleet remained in Valkyrie space, teaching them how to defend against void dwellers. Not by hiding or praying, but by understanding the very forces that had terrified them for so long. Admiral Coleman addressed the Valkyrie High Council. "We'll help you set up void space monitoring stations. Next time they try something, you'll be ready." The Valkyrie were beginning to understand. Humans weren't just visitors who had mastered forbidden technology. They were beings who had taken cosmic horror and turned it into a science, a tool, and when necessary, a weapon. As the fleet worked to repair the damage to space-time, Martins made a final log entry. "The void dwellers learned something today. They learned that breaking reality isn't enough. You have to understand it too. And humanity. We've been understanding it for a very long time." Valkyrie Ambassador Yurtel stood at the window of the human embassy, watching ships tear holes in reality with casual precision. 6 months had passed since the battle with the hostile void dwellers. In that time, everything had changed. Still getting used to the view, Catherine Bennett, the human ambassador, asked as she joined him. "I'm trying to understand," Yurtel said slowly, "how your people can be so normal about all this." Below them, a human cargo ship created a perfect tear in space-time, slipped through, and vanished. The scar in reality healed within seconds, thanks to new stabilization technology developed after the battle. "Normal is relative," Bennett replied. "To us, the strange thing was finding out that other species didn't use void space technology." In orbit, the USV Pioneer was conducting training exercises with Valkyrie defense ships. Captain Christopher Moore was teaching them how to detect and respond to dimensional incursions. The Valkyrie crews, once terrified of reality tears, now learned to create them under human guidance. "Your civilization," Yurtel observed, "didn't just master the horrors our ancestors warned us about. You industrialized them, standardized them. And now you're teaching us to do the same." Bennett smiled. "Sometimes the best way to handle fear is to understand it. Speaking of which, how are the joint research projects going?" The projects were another sign of how much had changed. In laboratories across Valkyr Prime, human and Valkyrie, scientists worked together to study void space phenomena. Frank Patterson's team had set up a permanent research station dedicated to understanding the quantum mechanics of reality tears. "The friendly void dwellers have been very helpful," Patterson reported during his daily briefing. "Their understanding of dimensional physics complements our engineering approach perfectly." Indeed, some of the peaceful void dwellers had remained. fascinated by humanity's technological mastery of dimensional barriers. They shared knowledge with human researchers while the Valkyries slowly learned not to flee in terror at their presence. Susan Reynolds led the communication efforts with these entities. Her team had developed a complex system of quantum signals that allowed for detailed exchanges of scientific information. "They're as curious about us as we are about them," she explained to a group of Valkyrie scientists. They never imagined a physical species could manipulate reality so precisely. Admiral Nancy Coleman, now the commander of the Joint Human-Valkyrie Defense Fleet, had established new protocols for void space security. Every ship crew, human and Valkyrie alike, trained to handle dimensional incursions. "The hostile void dwellers won't catch us unprepared again," she told her officers. "We're turning their greatest weapon, fear itself, into our greatest defense." In the Valkyrie High Council chamber, debates raged about the changes humanity had brought to their civilization. Some argued that they were losing their way, abandoning ancient warnings. Others pointed out that those warnings had never imagined a species like humanity. "Look at what they've accomplished," one council member said, gesturing to the data screens showing human void space technology. "They took our nightmares and turned them into everyday tools." Seth Hall, now heading the Valkyrie Science Academy's Void Space Division, spent his days studying human technology. The mathematics that had once terrified him now fascinated him. The reality tiers that had seemed like cosmic wounds now appeared as doorways to understanding. "Our ancestors weren't wrong to fear these forces," he told his students, "but they never imagined we could master them. The humans showed us that cosmic horror, properly understood, becomes cosmic opportunity." Peter Martinez, captain of the Stormbreaker, led regular patrols through Valkyrie space. His ship's enhanced void space drive could detect any unusual dimensional activity. The hostile void dwellers hadn't returned, but humanity had taught the Valkyrie to be ready if they did. "The universe is stranger than anyone imagined," Martinez told his crew during a quiet moment. "But that's why we explore it. Not to fear the unknown, but to understand it." The Valkyrie were learning. Each day, more of their ships practiced controlled void space jumps. Each week, more of their scientists joined the research teams studying dimensional physics. Each month, more of their people looked at the tiers in reality not with terror, but with curiosity. Ambassador Bennett watched this transformation with satisfaction. "Your people are adapting remarkably well," she told Your Telephone. "Soon you'll be making your own void space drives." "Yes," Urtel agreed, "but we'll never be quite like humans. You didn't just overcome cosmic horror. You embraced it, made it part of your civilization." In orbit, another human ship arrived, its reality tear-precise and controlled. The Valkyrie observers noted its arrival with professional interest rather than religious dread. Progress, Bennett thought, came in many forms. "We've received a request from Earth Command," she told Your Telephone. "They want to establish a permanent void space research center here, a place where humans, Valkyrie, and friendly void dwellers can work together to understand the nature of reality itself." Urtel considered this. A year ago, such a suggestion would have seemed like madness. Now, after watching humans casually manipulate the fabric of space-time, after seeing them fight cosmic horrors with their own methods, after witnessing their transformation of nightmares into tools, it made perfect sense. "The universe is changing," he said finally. "Or perhaps our understanding of it is. Either way, we can't go back to hiding from what we don't understand." "That's the spirit," Bennett smiled. "Welcome to humanity's version of normal." As night fell on Valkyr Prime, ships continued their void space jumps, reality tiers opened and healed, and scientists of 3 very different species worked together to understand the nature of existence itself. The cosmic horror hadn't ended. It had evolved. Humanity had shown that the darkness between realities wasn't something to fear. It was something to study, to master, to use. They had taken the Valkyrie's greatest nightmares and turned them into humanity's greatest achievements. And perhaps that, Urtel reflected as he watched another ship tear a perfect hole in spacetime, was the most wonderfully terrifying thing of all. For in the end, humanity hadn't just confronted cosmic horror, they had become it, and then they had made it better.